Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took Loki's place as the god of mischief. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The light of Asgard was a living thing. It was not the harsh, singular glare of a solitary sun, but a symphony of luminescence that cascaded from the celestial tapestry above. It gilded the golden spires of the royal palace until they blazed like captured stars and filtered through the emerald leaves of the royal gardens, dappling the marble walkways in patterns of shimmering jade and ivory. It was a light that hummed with ancient magic, a constant, gentle pressure against the skin that reminded all who dwelled there that they stood in the heart of the Nine Realms, a place of gods and legends. For Isuku, second prince of Asgard, this light was both a comfort and a constant, silent accuser. It was the light of heroes, of warriors, of beings whose legends were forged in glorious, head-on battle. It was his brother's light. His own light was different. He sat cross-legged on a perfectly manicured lawn, his posture more befitting a scholar than a prince. His traditional Asgardian attire, fine green leathers and dark trousers, accented with subtle gold embroidery, was immaculate, yet he seemed to fold into himself, trying to take up as little space as possible. Before him, 3 small Asgardian children, no older than 10 winters, were on the verge of tears. Their game of catch had gone awry, and their prized possession, a small, hand-carved ball of Yggdrasil wood, had vanished into an impossibly dense hedge of starlight roses. "It's gone forever!" wailed a little girl with hair the color of spun moonlight. "The thorns will shred it!" sobbed her brother, a stout boy whose face was already red and puffy. Isuku offered them a soft, reassuring smile, a gesture that seemed to fight a natural upward twitch of his lips into a worried frown. Now, he said, his voice quiet, a stark contrast to the booming confidence that characterized the rest of his family. "Nothing is ever truly lost in Asgard, just temporarily misplaced. It's a form of mischief the universe enjoys. We just have to be a little more mischievous to get it back." He raised a slender hand, his long fingers tracing unseen patterns in the air. A faint, emerald glow, like captured fireflies, began to coalesce around his fingertips. He mumbled under his breath, a soft, rhythmic cascade of words that was his constant companion. "Initial trajectory suggests an entry point approximately 1.2 meters from the ground, factoring in the density of the star rose foliage and the rebound coefficient of Yggdrasil wood. The final resting position should be there." Instead of parting the thorny bushes or using brute force, Izuku's magic took a gentler, more whimsical form. The emerald light spun and solidified, forming into a delicate, shimmering butterfly, then another and another, until a small cloud of them hovered in the air, their wings beating in silent, perfect unison. The children gasped, their tears momentarily forgotten. "Follow them," Izuku whispered, a genuine sparkle in his green eyes. The butterflies fluttered as one, diving towards the hedge. They did not push through it, but rather phased between the leaves and thorns, their light illuminating the dark interior. They swirled around a spot deep within the bush, their collective glow intensifying, painting a single branch in brilliant green. Tucked safely between 2 thick stems, untouched by the thorns, sat the lost ball. One of the butterflies, bolder than the rest, gently nudged the ball with its wing of light. It rolled forward, gathering momentum, and then popped out of the hedge, landing softly in the little girl's outstretched hands. The children erupted in joyous cheers. They swarmed the young prince, hugging his legs and thanking him profusely. Izuku's face flushed a deep crimson, and he awkwardly patted their heads, unaccustomed to such overt praise. "It was nothing," he stammered. "Just a little trick." From a nearby balcony, a royal guard watched the scene, his brow furrowed in confusion. Prince Thor would have simply ripped the hedge from the ground. Prince Isuku, he had coaxed the ball out with glowing insects. The guard shook his head. The second prince was an enigma, the god of mischief who used his divine power to find lost toys. It was, for lack of a better word, strange. The distant, thunderous crash of metal on stone jolted Isuku from his reverie. He knew that sound. It was the sound of his brother. "Thank you, Prince Isuku!" The children chorused one last time before running off, their laughter echoing through the gardens. Isuku watched them go, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. That was the kind of mischief he understood, the kind that turned tears into laughter. He stood, brushing off his tunic, the smile fading as the sounds from the training grounds grew louder. A deep, familiar ache settled in his chest, a mixture of profound love for his brother and the crushing weight of his own inadequacy. He made his way towards the arena, his quiet footsteps a whisper against the mighty stones of the palace. The very architecture of Asgard seemed built for Thor. Grand, sweeping archways that could accommodate a charging bilgesnipe, vast halls where a warrior's boisterous laugh could echo for miles, training fields vast enough to withstand the full, unrestrained fury of Mjolnir. Isuku, by contrast, felt most at home in the quiet corners of this magnificent world, the great library, with its towering shelves of scrolls containing the knowledge of 1,000,000 star systems, the Orrery, where he could trace the delicate dance of galaxies with a touch, his own private study, a chaotic mess of half-finished runic equations, star charts, and his most prized possessions, a collection of leather-bound journals. He reached the edge of the main training arena, a vast coliseum carved from a single, massive piece of obsidian, and paused in the shadows of an archway. The scene before him was one of glorious, heroic power. Thor, Prince of Thunder, was a living storm. His golden hair whipped around his face as he moved, a whirlwind of muscle, leather, and steel. Mjolnir was a blur in his hand, a silver comet leaving trails of crackling ozone in the air. He fought with a joyous, unthinking abandon, his laughter booming across the field as he parried a furious assault from Lady Sif and the warriors 3. Fandral the Dashing was a fencer's dream, his blade a silver needle darting and weaving. Hogun the Grim was a stoic wall of unyielding defense. Volstagg the Voluminous was a surprisingly agile juggernaut, and Sif, her dark hair a stark contrast to her gleaming armor, was a warrior of peerless skill and ferocity. Together, they were the greatest fighters of their generation. And Thor was better than all of them combined. He spun, deflecting Sif's sword with his vambrace, blocked a strike from Hogun with Mjolnir's haft, and sidestepped Fandral's lunge, all in a single, fluid motion. "Is that all, my friends?" Thor roared, his voice filled with glee. "My brother's illusions put up more of a fight than this." Isuku flinched, even though he knew the comment was meant as a jesting compliment. He pulled a small, worn journal from a pouch at his belt and began to write, his quill scratching furiously against the page. It was an old habit, one he'd had since he was a boy. He didn't just watch, he analyzed. Thor's overhand swing generates a localized pressure wave sufficient to displace an unanchored opponent of up to 200 kilograms. Vulnerability: a 0.7-second recovery period where his left side is exposed. Sif's shield bash is powerful, but telegraphs with a subtle shift in her footing. Fandral remains too reliant on flourish. His lunges are elegant but lack true commitment. A simple feint followed by a low sweep would be. His muttering was barely audible over the din of battle, the words a familiar, comforting rhythm. This was his battlefield. Not the one of clashing steel, but the one of angles, timing, and strategy. The sparring match concluded as it always did, with Thor standing victorious, his friends laughing and panting around him. "A fine bout," Volstagg declared, wiping sweat from his brow. "But I dare say it has given me a mighty thirst." "As always, Volstagg," Sif said with a wry smile. "But the prince is correct. We grow too accustomed to his style. We need a greater challenge." As if on cue, a section of the arena floor began to rumble. Stone plates shifted and ground together, and a massive figure rose from the depths. It was an Einherjar Mark IV training golem, a relic from his grandfather Bor's time, forged from enchanted Yaru metal and animated by a bound earth spirit. It was a 10-foot-tall behemoth of a construct, all sharp angles and glowing runic lines. "Ah, excellent!" Thor boomed, cracking his knuckles. "A true test of strength," he hefted Mjolnir, a grin splitting his face. The golem's single, crystalline eye glowed a menacing crimson as it locked onto the Prince of Thunder. The ancient protocols were simple: engage the most prominent Asgardian warrior on the field and press them until they yielded. But something was wrong. Isuku saw it before anyone else. A flicker in the golem's central runic matrix. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor in its left leg. The hum of its internal power source was off-key, a discordant note in the symphony of Asgardian magic. "The binding runes are degrading," Isuku muttered, his eyes widening in alarm. The containment field is fluctuating. That's not a mark for operational hum, that's a power overload. Oh no. The golem took a step, its movements jerky and unpredictable. Its crimson eye scanned the field, bypassing Thor entirely. Its gaze settled on the far wall of the arena, where a row of magnificent statues stood sentinel, carvings of Asgard's former kings, including their father and grandfather. The golem's programming was corrupted. It was no longer seeking a warrior to challenge. It was targeting a source of significant historical and magical resonance. It raised a massive stone fist, preparing to charge. "Halt! Construct!" Thor commanded, stepping forward. "Your opponent is here!" The golem ignored him. It lumbered forward, its heavy footfalls shaking the very foundations of the arena. "It's malfunctioning!" Sif shouted, drawing her sword. "We have to stop it!" Thor let out a frustrated growl. "Stand aside! I will handle this!" He spun Mjolnir, building momentum for a devastating throw. Izuku's mind raced, calculating trajectories and potential outcomes in a fraction of a second. No, that's the wrong approach. The golem's chassis is solid Yaru, but the internal spirit is earthen. Mjolnir's impact won't just shatter the frame, the resulting shockwave of divine energy will violently expel the spirit. The kinetic transfer will be immense. It will pulverize the golem, but it will also collapse that entire section of the wall. Grandfather Bor's statue. Father would be furious. There has to be a better way. Redirect, don't destroy. Nullify, don't obliterate. His muttering grew more frantic as he devised the plan. Need a distraction. Something primal, something an ancient earth spirit would recognize as a superior threat. Not a warrior. A predator. A bilgesnipe. Yes, their territorial pheromones are notoriously offensive to archaic geomagical constructs. Illusionary density needs to be at least 74% to be convincing. Multisensory projection required. Auditory and olfactory components are critical. While Thor was still winding up for his throw, Izuku sprang into action. He stepped out from the shadows, his hands weaving a complex tapestry of emerald light. He was no warrior. He couldn't stop the golem with force. But he was the god of mischief. And his mind was the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal. A thick, green mist, smelling faintly of ozone and damp earth, poured from his hands, pooling on the ground in front of the charging golem. It swirled and coalesced, rising into a monstrous shape. Horns thick as tree trunks curled from a brutish, reptilian head. A maw filled with jagged, crystalline teeth opened in a silent, menacing roar. A massive, scaled body, larger than any two frost giants, took form. The illusion of a greater bilgesnipe, one of the most feared beasts in the Vanaheim swamps, solidified into terrifying reality. The training arena was suddenly filled with the phantom stench of swamp gas and monster musk. An illusionary, guttural roar echoed in the minds of all present, a sound that spoke of ancient hunger and territorial fury. The golem skidded to a halt. Its corrupted programming, primitive and instinctual, registered the new arrival. It assessed the bilgesnipe as a Class A alpha threat, a far greater priority than the inanimate statues. It turned, its crimson eye fixated on the phantom beast, and let out a grinding, metallic bellow of challenge. Thor lowered Mjolnir, his jaw slack with astonishment. "Brother? What in the name of the Norns?" Izuku didn't answer. His focus was absolute. This was the first part of his plan, misdirection. Now came the second, nullification. While the golem was entirely focused on the massive illusion, Isuku made his move. He cast a secondary, far more subtle spell upon himself, a simple cloaking glamour that bent light and sound around him, rendering him effectively invisible to the golem's primitive senses. He darted forward, a silent shadow moving across the arena floor. The golem charged the bilgesnipe, its fists raised to smash the beast. The illusionary monster reared back, roaring in defiance. It was a perfect piece of theater, designed to hold the golem's attention for precisely 4.8 seconds. That was all the time Izuku needed. He slid to a halt behind the lumbering construct, his hand glowing with a soft, green light. On the golem's back was a small, circular plate of polished bronze, the access port for its power source, the Heartstone. Izuku pressed his palm against it. He didn't try to force it open. Instead, he whispered a single, complex runic word. The word was a key, a command woven into the very fabric of ancient Asgardian artifice. The plate dematerialized for a fraction of a second. Inside, a glowing, fist-sized crystal pulsed with raw, chaotic energy. This was the source of the malfunction. Isuku reached in, his fingers brushing against the volatile stone. At the same time, with his other hand, he pulled a smooth, gray river rock from his pouch, a stone he'd been practicing teleportation spells with earlier. He muttered a final, complex phrase, a delicate transpositional equation. An object in motion remains in motion. An object of power can be swapped for an object of null. Balance the energy differential and execute. There was a faint pop and a shimmer of green light. The furiously glowing heartstone vanished from the golem's core. In its place, the inert river rock settled into the housing. The effect was instantaneous. The golem's crimson eye flickered and died. Its massive limbs froze mid-swing, just inches from making contact with the illusionary bilgesnipe. The humming of its power core ceased. With a final, groaning sigh of metal, the 10-foot-tall war machine powered down completely, becoming nothing more than a statue of inert Uru. Isuku let out a shaky breath, the grand illusion of the bilgesnipe dissolving into a shower of green sparkles. He stumbled back, the strain of casting two complex spells simultaneously making his head spin. The arena was silent for a long moment. Thor, Sif, and the warriors three stared, first at the deactivated golem, then at the empty space where the monster had been, and finally at the slender, panting form of Isuku. In his hand he held the still-hot heartstone, its chaotic energy now safely contained within a shimmering green sphere of his own magic. Thor was the first to break the silence. He strode over, a look of utter bewilderment on his handsome face. He clapped Isuku on the shoulder, a friendly gesture that nearly sent the slighter prince sprawling. "Brother!" he bellowed, a wide, incredulous grin spreading across his face. That was... I don't even have the words! A giant swamp beast! By the beard of father, you are full of surprises! It was just an illusion, Thor! Isuku mumbled, his cheeks flushing. The golem's core was overloading. Your throw would have destroyed the west wall. Bah! The wall could be rebuilt! Thor boomed, dismissing the concern with a wave of his hand. But the look on its face, if it had a face, when that creature appeared. Priceless! You saved the day with a clever trick. Fandral sauntered over, sheathing his sword. Indeed. A most entertaining solution, my prince. Far more theatrical than simple smashing. A warrior's path is direct. Sif added, her expression unreadable but tinged with a familiar skepticism. But I concede your methods were effective. No property was damaged. They saw it as a novelty. A clever parlor trick scaled up for a larger stage. They didn't see the complex calculations, the deep understanding of ancient magics, the precise execution of multiple, interwoven spells. They didn't see the strategy. They just saw mischief. Izuku's heart sank, just a little. He forced a smile. I'm glad I could help. He had saved priceless historical artifacts, and prevented a massive amount of collateral damage. He had neutralized the threat without violence. By any logical measure, it was a perfect victory. So why did it feel so hollow? The Great Hall of Asgard was a testament to glory. The vaulted ceiling was a star map of the entire cosmos, constellations swirling in a slow, majestic dance. Banners depicting heroic battles and legendary beasts hung from the marble columns, and the long, oaken table was laden with a feast fit for gods, roasted meats, exotic fruits from Alfheim, and great flagons of golden mead. The mood at the royal table was jovial. Thor, in his element, was regaling their parents, Odin and Frigga, with a grand, embellished tale of the afternoon's events. And there it was, a monstrosity from the foulest swamps of Vanaheim, its roar shaking the very foundations of the arena. Thor proclaimed, gesturing wildly with a roasted bird leg. The golem, a beast of mindless iron, quaked in its metallic boots. It completely forgot about me, its true opponent, and charged this phantom foe. He paused for dramatic effect, taking a hearty swig of mead. And who was the master of this grand deception? None other than my own brother! He beamed at Isuku, who was trying to become one with his chair, his gaze fixed on his plate of untouched food. With a whisper and a flick of his wrist, Thor continued, his voice full of genuine, if misguided, pride. Isuku tamed the beast that I would have smashed to dust. He did not even draw a weapon. A strange way to win a battle, to be sure, but a victory nonetheless. Laughter and murmurs of impressed curiosity rippled through the hall. Isuku wished the floor would swallow him whole. Thor's praise, meant to be kind, felt like a backhanded compliment. He was being lauded for his cleverness, for his trickery, for being the very opposite of a warrior. Frigga, queen of Asgard, watched Isuku with kind, knowing eyes. Her expression was one of gentle pride. She was the one who had taught him Cedar, the magic of the Vanir. She had seen his unique potential from the beginning, not as a warrior, but as a protector in a different mold. It sounds as though Izuku's quick thinking saved the kingdom a great deal of trouble and repairs, she said, her voice a calm and melodic counterpoint to Thor's booming tale. There is strength in wisdom as well as in power, my son. But Odin, the Allfather, did not smile. He sat at the head of the table, his single eye fixed on his younger son with an unnerving intensity. The cheerful noise of the hall seemed to dim under his gaze. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy, like the grinding of ancient stones. Deception, Odin said, the word cutting through the celebratory atmosphere. The hall fell silent. You won the day with a phantom. A lie given form. Isuku froze, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. He slowly lowered it, his appetite vanishing completely. Father, he began, but Odin raised a hand, silencing him. A prince of Asgard, a future leader of the 9 realms, must be a beacon of strength and honor. The Allfather continued, his voice resonating with regal authority. His word must be his bond, his actions direct and true. He must face his enemies head-on, so that all can see his might and know that he is worthy of their fealty. Odin's gaze swept from Isuku to Thor, who sat straighter, puffing his chest out slightly. When Thor fights, the realms see the power of Asgard made manifest. They see unwavering strength. They see honor. When you scheme, he let the word hang in the air, laden with disappointment. They see shadows. They see whispers. A victory won through trickery is no true victory. It breeds doubt. It plants the seeds of mistrust. What is a king whose subjects can never be certain if what they see is real? Each word was a physical blow. Izuku curled in on himself, the familiar shame washing over him like an icy tide. He could feel the eyes of the entire court upon him. He was the god of mischief, and his father was telling him that his very nature was a flaw, a weakness, a dishonor to their family. My love, Frigga interjected softly, her voice firm despite its gentleness. He saved a piece of our history. He achieved victory with no bloodshed and no destruction. Is that not a worthy outcome? The outcome is not the issue, my queen, Odin countered, his voice softening slightly when addressing her, but his conviction remained absolute. It is the method. A foundation built on tricks is a foundation of sand. Thor is learning to be a king. He needs a brother who will stand beside him in honorable battle, not one who lurks in the shadows, pulling strings. The Allfather looked back at his youngest son. Mischief has its place, my boy. A sharp mind is a tool. But it must be an edge to the sword, not the sword itself. Do you understand? Izuku could only nod, his throat tight with unspoken arguments and crushing self-doubt. He didn't know how to explain that his tricks weren't born of a desire to deceive, but a desire to help. He saw the world as a complex puzzle, and his magic, his analysis, were the tools he used to solve it in the most efficient, least destructive way possible. How could he make his father understand that he didn't want to be a sword? He wanted to be the shield that didn't need to be struck. He excused himself from the table as soon as it was polite to do so, the taste of ashes in his mouth. He fled the noise and the judgment of the great hall, seeking the one place he truly felt at peace. His study was a sanctuary of organized chaos. Scrolls were stacked precariously on every surface, detailed star charts were pinned to the walls, and a large central table was covered in half-disassembled Asgardian artifacts. The air smelled of old parchment, metallic ozone, and the faint, sweet scent of the ink he mixed himself. This was his realm. He sank into a worn, high-backed chair and pulled his latest journal from his belt. He uncorked his inkwell, dipped his quill, and stared at the blank page. The title he had written on the inside cover seemed to mock him now. Strategic Mischief for the Nine Realms, a Prince's Analysis. His hand trembled slightly as he began to write. He didn't write about his hurt feelings or his father's disappointment. Instead, he did the only thing that ever made him feel centered. He analyzed. Incident report, Einherjar Golem malfunction, training arena. Objective, neutralize rogue construct while minimizing collateral damage to historical artifacts and palace infrastructure. Methodology, 1. Threat assessment, Golem's programming corrupted, targeting resonant magical signatures instead of designated opponents. Direct kinetic force, i.e. Mjolnir, deemed high risk due to potential for catastrophic energy release and structural damage. 2. Strategy formulation, a non-violent, two-stage solution devised. Stage 1. Misdirection via high-fidelity, multisensory illusionary projection. Stage 2. Nullification via targeted transposition of the golem's power source. 3. Execution analysis. Illusion of greater Bilgesnipe successfully diverted golem's primary focus. Olfactory component proved surprisingly effective. However, the energy cost of the projection was 12% higher than calculated, causing minor mental fatigue. Must refine the energy-to-density ratio for future large-scale phantoms. Transposition spell was successful. The swap was seamless. Outcome, objective achieved. Threat neutralized with 0% collateral damage. Socio-political fallout. Method perceived by peers and the All-Father as trickery, lacking in martial honor. This perception remains a significant tactical weakness. How does one prove the honor in a plan that prevents a fight from ever happening? How can a hero be recognized if his greatest victories are the battles no one ever knew he fought? He paused, resting his quill on the page. He stared at the last sentence, the question that had defined his entire life. He was a prince of Asgard, son of Odin, the god of mischief. But deep in his soul, in the place where his magic and his heart intertwined, he had a secret, desperate desire. He didn't want to be a trickster. He wanted to be a hero. He looked up, catching his reflection in the polished surface of a ceremonial shield hanging on the wall. He saw a boy with wide, worried green eyes and a storm of thoughts raging behind them. A boy drowning in the shadow of a thunderous, beloved brother and a mighty, disappointed father. He was the god of mischief. And he had no idea how to make that mean what he needed it to. With a sigh, he dipped his quill back in the ink and began to formulate a new theory, his muttering filling the quiet solitude of his room. Perhaps the definition of heroism itself is the variable that needs to be addressed. The day of Thor's coronation dawned not with a sunrise, but with an amplification of Asgard's inherent radiance. The eternal celestial glow seemed to burn brighter, its golden light striking the bifrost bridge until it shimmered like a solid rainbow and igniting the spires of the city into pillars of white gold fire. A palpable energy coursed through the kingdom, a thrum of anticipation that vibrated in the very stones of the palace. It was the sound of history being made. From the highest balcony of his chambers, Isuku watched the city awaken. Throngs of Asgardians, dressed in their finest silks and polished armor, flowed through the grand avenues towards the palace, their voices a rising chorus of celebration. Banners of Odin's raven and Thor's hammer hung from every archway, fluttering in a breeze that carried the scent of roasted meats and flowering star blossoms. Music from 1,000 lutes and horns swelled from the city square, a triumphant symphony for a new king. For the first time in a long time, the familiar ache of inadequacy in Izuku's chest was muted, replaced by a surge of genuine, unadulterated pride. He had watched his brother grow from a reckless boy into a mighty warrior, the undisputed champion of their age. Thor was everything Asgard expected a king to be: strong, confident, decisive, and honorable to a fault. He was the sun, and Isuku was content, today, to simply be a planet warmed by his light. A heavy, familiar hand clapped down on his shoulder, nearly buckling his knees. "There you are, brother!" Thor's voice was a joyous boom that could shatter lesser glass. He was already clad in his ceremonial armor, gleaming silver plates intricately carved with scenes of his victories, a magnificent crimson cape clasped at his shoulders with 2 golden medallions. He looked every inch the king he was about to become. "Are you not going to join the festivities? The people are singing my name!" Isuku turned, a sincere smile gracing his features. "They are. And they should be. It is a great day for you, Thor. For all of Asgard. Thor's bravado softened for a moment, replaced by a rare flicker of vulnerability. He ran a hand through his golden hair. It is a great deal. To sit where father has sat. To hold that responsibility. You are ready, Isuku said, his voice quiet but firm. He reached up and adjusted the drape of Thor's cape, smoothing a wrinkle with practiced, analytical precision. Your strength gives the people courage, your heart gives them hope. They don't just respect you, Thor. They love you. Thor's chest puffed out, the brief moment of doubt vanquished. He grinned, clapping Isuku on the back again. And with my brilliant brother to advise me with his clever schemes, how could I possibly fail? You will stand by my side, and together, we will lead Asgard into a new age of glory. Izuku's smile tightened slightly. Clever schemes. Even in his most heartfelt moments, Thor saw him as the master of tricks, the court jester with a strategic mind. Still, he pushed the thought aside. Today was not about him. Always, brother, he promised. Now go. Your public awaits their hero. I have a few final details to check. Details? Thor laughed. You and your details. Just try to enjoy the day, Izuku. Don't analyze it to death. With a final, bone-crushing hug, Thor strode from the room, his heavy footsteps echoing with purpose. Izuku watched him go, his pride warring with a familiar sense of detachment. Thor was going to meet his destiny. Izuku was going to check the alignment of the ceremonial runestones and ensure the guards' patrol routes were optimized for crowd control. They were two sides of a royal coin, one embossed with a glorious profile, the other with intricate, unseen mechanics. He made his way through the palace, taking the less-traveled servant corridors to avoid the throngs of visiting dignitaries and boisterous nobles. It was his preferred method of travel, quiet, efficient, and offering a unique perspective on the palace's inner workings. He liked the quiet hum of the palace's core, the scent of polish and ozone, the feeling of being a ghost in his own home. As he passed the shadowed alcove near the lower halls that led towards the vaults, he heard voices, low, conspiratorial, and sharp with an urgency that immediately set his nerves on edge. He froze, pressing himself flat against the cool stone wall, his natural quietness serving him better than any invisibility spell. The Allfather is a sentimental old fool, a voice hissed. It was smooth and cultured, but with an undercurrent of cold steel. Izuku recognized it instantly. Lord Varys, a senior member of Odin's council, a hardliner known for his belief in Asgard's military supremacy. He speaks of peace and treaties when our enemies fester on our borders. Yotenheim grows bolder with every passing season, but Thor will be king. A second, rougher voice replied. He is not his father. He has a warrior's temper. Precisely, Varys said, and Izuku could almost hear the cruel smile in his voice. Thor's arrogance is his greatest weakness, and our greatest asset. He is a hammer, and he sees every problem as a nail. He needs only a reason to swing. An insult to his new crown, perhaps. A brazen act of defiance on the very day of his ascension. A cold dread, far colder than the Fimbulwinter of Yotenheim, crept up Izuku's spine. The second voice grunted. You're certain they will take the bait? The path will be clear? My arrangements are flawless, Varys assured him. A minor disturbance, a momentary lapse in security. Enough for a few of them to slip in and make for the vault. They need not even succeed. Their mere presence within these sacred walls will be an act of war. It will be the provocation Thor needs to put the frost giants in their place, once and for all. He will lead our armies to glorious victory, and I will be the one who guided his hand. Asgard will be stronger, and I will have the ear of a grateful and predictable king. Izuku's blood ran cold. This wasn't just treason. It was a meticulous, cynical plan to manipulate his brother, to use his pride as a trigger for a war that would cost thousands of lives. Varys wasn't trying to usurp the throne, he was trying to hijack it. He heard their footsteps recede, and he waited, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, until he was certain they were gone. He slumped against the wall, his mind racing, trying to process the sheer audacity of the plot. Varys was going to let frost giants into the palace. Today, he had to act. He had to warn someone. He straightened up, his mind already cycling through options with desperate speed. He began to pace the deserted corridor, his muttering a low, frantic hum. Option A, tell father. He immediately discarded it. The evidence? His word against that of a respected lord, the god of mischief, accusing a pillar of the court of an elaborate conspiracy on the day of his brother's coronation. Odin's recent lecture rang in his ears. He would be seen as a jealous, conniving child, attempting to sow discord out of spite. Probability of success, negligible. Risk of personal disgrace, absolute. Option B, tell Thor. This was more tempting, but infinitely more dangerous. Thor was a torrent of emotion, especially today. If Isuku told him of the plot, Thor wouldn't wait for proof. He would grab Mjolnir, find Varys, and likely tear the palace apart demanding a confession. He would act, not think. Varys had said it himself, Thor was a hammer. He would fall right into the trap, his rage confirming every one of Varys's manipulations. It would make everything worse. Option C, confront Varys directly. A fool's errand. Varys would deny everything, laugh in his face, and paint Isuku as a paranoid schemer. Isuku had no proof, only words he had overheard in a shadow. He was trapped. Trapped by his reputation. Trapped by his own nature. His greatest strengths, his analytical mind, his understanding of subtleties, were useless if no one would trust the source. He couldn't provide proof, so he would be dismissed. A direct approach was doomed to fail, therefore, he had to take an indirect one. He stopped pacing, his fists clenched at his sides. He couldn't expose the plot, not yet. But he could send a warning. A message that only his family, his father in particular, would understand. He needed to draw their attention to the source of the threat without saying a word. Yotenheim. His mind flashed to the one place, the one object, that embodied that threat more than any other. A relic of the last great war, kept deep within the palace's most secure location. Odin's vault. The casket of ancient winters. A new plan began to form, a desperate gambit born of his unique skill set. It was a plan built on subtlety and misdirection. It was, he realized with a sinking heart, a scheme. A trick, the very thing his father had just condemned. But what choice did he have? He had to use the tools he was given. The warning must be subtle, he thought, his muttering taking on a focused, determined edge. Not an alarm, just a flicker. A whisper of cold. If I can create a small, localized magical resonance around the casket, Heimdall might sense it. Father would certainly feel it through his connection to the vault's enchantments. It would be a magical anomaly, pointing directly to a frost giant artifact. It would say, the danger is from Yotenheim. It would put them on alert, force them to increase security, and Varys's plan would fail before it even began. It was risky. It involved meddling with one of the most powerful artifacts in the 9 realms. But it was the only option he could see that didn't end in immediate disaster. It was a hero's plan, wrapped in the guise of a prank. He could only pray they would see the intention and not just the method. The throne room was a breathtaking spectacle of divine power and regal splendor. Sunlight, filtered through massive crystalline windows, illuminated dust motes of pure gold dancing in the air. Thousands of beings from across the 9 realms filled the tiered galleries, their fine clothes a tapestry of 100 different cultures. At the front of the hall, the warriors 3 and Lady Sif stood as an honor guard, their armor polished to a mirror shine. Isuku stood near the base of the throne, slightly behind his mother. He maintained an outward composure of calm princely dignity, but inside, his thoughts were a maelstrom. Every smiling face in the crowd could be a conspirator. Every shadow could hold an enemy. The great horns of Asgard sounded, their call echoing to the very roots of Yggdrasil. The massive golden doors at the end of the hall swung open. Thor strode through them, and the hall erupted. The roar of the crowd was a physical force. He walked with an easy, confident swagger, Mjolnir held loosely in his hand. He wore a winged helmet, its silver catching the light. He beamed at the adoring crowd, soaking in their adulation. When he reached the dais, he knelt before Odin, casting a triumphant grin at Isuku. Isuku gave him a small, encouraging nod, his heart pounding with a mixture of pride and terror. Odin rose from his throne, Gungnir, his great spear, striking the marble floor with a sound like a thunderclap. The hall fell into a reverent silence. Thor Odinson! The All-Father's voice boomed, filled with the weight of ages. My heir, my firstborn! So long have I protected Asgard and the lives of the innocent across the 9 realms. Now, the time has come for a new king. As Odin began the long, formal rites of coronation, Isuku knew it was time. This was his only window. All eyes were on Thor. The guards were focused on the ceremony. No one would notice the second prince slipping away. With a quiet murmur to his mother about needing a moment, he backed away, melting into the shadows at the edge of the dais. He moved with a practiced stealth that would have impressed even the most elite of Asgard's scouts, his soft leather boots making no sound on the polished floor. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors leading to the vaults, his mind a whirlwind of runic equations and magical theory. The plan was solid, but the variables were terrifying. He was about to channel his own seed magic into a nexus of ancient, alien power. He reached the great, sealed doors of Odin's vault. 2 colossal Einherjar, automaton guards even older and more powerful than the training golem, stood silent sentinel. They were bound to Odin's will and would permit no one to pass. No one, except an Odinson. Isuku stepped forward, placing his palm on the cold, Yaryu door. Isuku, son of Odin, he stated, his voice barely a whisper. I request entry. The glowing runes on the guard's armor flared to life. Their heads turned with the grinding of stone on stone, their featureless faces fixing on him. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought they would deny him. Then, with a deep groan of ancient mechanisms, the massive doors slid apart. He slipped inside, and the doors sealed behind him, plunging him into a chilling twilight. Odin's vault was not a treasury of gold and jewels. It was a mausoleum of conquered power, a library of cosmic weapons. On pedestals lining the walkway sat artifacts that could unmake stars and enslave civilizations. Isuku saw the eternal flame, the orb of Agamotto, and a dozen other relics whose names were only whispered in the darkest corners of the cosmos. The air was frigid and still, heavy with the pressure of contained energy. And there, at the very end of the walkway, resting on a dais of obsidian, was the casket of ancient winters. It looked deceptively simple, a rectangular box of chiseled, bluish ice that never melted, adorned with intricate Jotun carvings. But Isuku could feel its power, a deep, predatory cold that seemed to leach the warmth from his very soul. It was the heart of a blizzard, the promise of an endless winter, contained in a box. Okay, Isuku, he muttered to himself, his breath pluming in the icy air. Just a small resonance. A magical flare. Enough to be noticed, not enough to be dangerous. Simple energy transference. Modulate the frequency to mimic Jotun magic, just amplified. He extended his hands, palms facing the casket. A soft, emerald light, the color of new spring leaves, began to glow around his fingers. He wove the light into complex runic patterns, his muttering becoming a focused chant. He was building the spell layer by layer, carefully controlling the power output. He pushed the energy forward in a gentle stream. It was meant to wash over the casket, to excite its latent energies for a mere moment. But as his magic touched the ancient artifact, something unexpected happened. The casket responded. It didn't just passively accept the energy. It actively drew it in, pulling the magic from him like a starving man snatching bread. The gentle stream became a torrent. The casket's surface, once a dull blue, began to glow with a malevolent, inner light. A thin layer of frost instantly coated the floor around its pedestal, spreading outwards with terrifying speed. Isuku cried out in shock, trying to sever the connection, but it was too late. The casket's power, amplified by his own, flared violently. A wave of pure, absolute cold erupted from it, a silent, invisible shockwave that slammed into the vault doors. He had wanted to create a flicker. Instead, he had set off a magical explosion. Back in the throne room, Odin was reaching the climax of the ceremony. He raised Gungnir high. Do you swear to guard the 9 realms? I swear. Thor boomed, his voice filled with emotion. Do you swear to preserve the peace? I swear. Do you swear to cast aside all selfish ambition and pledge yourself only to the good of the realms? I swear. Thor roared, the promise echoing through the silent hall. Then on this day, Odin proclaimed, his voice resonating with the power of the Odin force. "I, Odin Allfather, proclaim you." He never finished the sentence. A deep, resonant boom shook the very foundations of the palace, coming from the direction of the vaults. The eternal flame, burning in a great brazier high above the throne, flickered violently, its light momentarily dimming. A wave of unnatural cold washed through the hall, making even the hardiest warriors shiver. Every head turned. The guards, their faces masks of alarm, drew their swords. Odin's single eye widened, his gaze turning hard as diamond. Before anyone could react, 3 figures materialized in the center of the hall, shimmering into existence from the cold air itself. They were Jotuns, frost giants. Their skin was a canvas of blue, etched with intricate, icy patterns. Their eyes burned like chips of red ice. They were lean, powerful, and armed with jagged blades of frozen magic. Panic erupted. Women screamed. Dignitaries scrambled for cover. The frost giants ignored the chaos. Their objective was clear. They moved with a chilling, predatory grace, making a beeline for the throne, and the vault that lay beyond it. Odin acted instantly. He slammed the butt of Gungnir onto the floor. A wave of golden energy erupted outwards, smashing into the frost giants, and sending them flying backwards. At the same time, the destroyer automaton, the ultimate guardian of the vault, teleported into the hall with a deafening clang of Yaru metal, its faceplate glowing with incinerating energy. The fight was brutal and blessedly short. The frost giants were no match for the Allfather and his ultimate weapon. Within seconds they were reduced to piles of steaming, melted ice on the pristine marble floor. But the damage was done. The ceremony was in ruins. The sanctity of the throne room had been violated. The enemies of Asgard had walked within its most sacred halls on its most sacred day. The hall was a mess of overturned benches and terrified nobles. But the worst damage was to Thor's face. His expression was a storm of raw fury, disbelief, and a profound, soul-deep humiliation. His coronation, the single greatest moment of his life, had been turned into a farce. He scanned the chaos, his eyes blazing. And then they landed on Isuku, who had just stumbled back into the throne room, his face pale with horror and guilt. Thor saw his brother's disheveled state, the lingering shimmer of green magic around his fingertips that he hadn't had time to dispel, and the location he had come from. In that instant, all the complex machinations of Lord Varus, all the subtleties of the plot, became irrelevant. Thor saw a simpler, more painful picture. His brother, the god of mischief, had been absent during the ceremony. A magical disturbance had emanated from the vaults. The disturbance had provided the perfect distraction for an enemy attack. The conclusion, to his enraged and humiliated mind, was as simple as it was devastating. He strode towards Isuku, his steps heavy, each one a hammer blow of accusation. The crowd parted before him. "You!" Thor snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He pointed a trembling finger at Isuku. "This was you." Isuku flinched as if struck. "Thor, no, you don't understand. I was trying to what?" Thor roared, his voice cracking with betrayal. "Trying to ruin my day? To make a mockery of me? To show father that his precious heir can't even protect his own coronation? It was a warning!" Isuku pleaded, his voice desperate. "There was a plot I overheard." "A plot? Or a prank?" Thor sneered, his face inches from Izuku's. "Another one of your clever, little illusions to get a laugh at my expense? Did you think it was funny, brother? Letting those monsters in here to spoil the most important day of my life? I didn't let them in!" Isuku cried, tears welling in his eyes. "I was trying to stop them," but Thor couldn't hear him. He was deafened by his own rage and shame. He saw only betrayal. He saw his trickster brother, the master of shadows and lies, standing at the heart of his humiliation. He saw jealousy given a monstrous form. "Lies!" Thor spat, the word dripping with venom. "It is all you have ever known. Shadows and lies." He shoved Isuku backwards. It wasn't a warrior's blow, but it was filled with so much fury that Isuku stumbled and fell, landing hard on the cold marble floor. He looked up at his brother, at the hero he loved and admired, and saw only contempt in his eyes. The entire court, his father included, stared down at him, a fallen prince in a ruined hall. The pride he had felt that morning was a distant, painful memory. He had tried to be a hero. He had tried to avert a war with a carefully calculated warning, but his calculations had been wrong. The variables had betrayed him. He had tried to write a warning, and instead, he had authored a catastrophe. The silence that fell upon the throne room was a thing of substance, heavier and more suffocating than the thickest winter shroud. The last of the steaming puddles that had been the frost giants were being magicked away by the palace guard, and servants moved with ghost-like quiet to right the overturned benches. But no amount of cleaning could scrub away the stain of the day's events. The air was thick with the residue of panic, the bitter tang of humiliation, and the sharp, metallic scent of drawn steel. The coronation was over. There would be no new king today. Thor stood at the center of it all, a pillar of incandescent rage. His jaw was a knot of granite, and his eyes, usually the color of a clear summer sky, were dark and turbulent like a storm-tossed sea. His gaze was fixed on the great golden doors through which the Jotuns had been dispatched, but his fury was a living entity that radiated outwards, scorching everyone in its vicinity. Lady Sif and the warriors three stood a respectful distance away, their own expressions a mixture of anger and grim loyalty. They were warriors, and an attack on their home, on their prince, was an insult that demanded retribution in blood. Isuku remained where he had fallen, a small, crumpled figure on the vast marble floor. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and analysis, was a chaotic ruin. Variables had cascaded out of his control, probabilities had collapsed into the worst possible outcomes, and his carefully constructed warning had detonated like a bomb. He had played a game of celestial chess and, with a single, arrogant move, had overturned the entire board. The weight of his failure was a physical pressure, making it hard to breathe. Odin, his face a mask of regal fury, addressed the assembled court. His voice, powered by the Odin force, was not loud, but it filled every corner of the hall, compelling absolute attention. The celebration is concluded. Return to your duties. Asgard remains secure. It was a command, not a reassurance. The dignitaries and nobles bowed their heads and shuffled out, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. Soon, only the royal family and their closest retainers remained. Frigga rushed to Izuku's side, her expression etched with concern. She helped him to his feet, her touch a small island of warmth in the chilling sea of his despair. "Are you hurt, my son?" she asked, her voice a low, worried murmur. "Only my pride," Izuku whispered, his eyes darting towards his brother. But Thor wasn't looking at him. His rage had found its true north. Yotenheim. He seethed, the name a curse on his lips. They dared to strike at us here, in our home, on this day. This is an act of war. It was the act of a few desperate fools, Odin countered, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. He had descended from the throne and stood before his eldest, Gungnir held tight in his fist. They were dealt with. The matter is finished. Finished? Thor spun to face him, his voice incredulous. "Father, they spat on our honor. They have made Asgard look weak, and you, old. Your policy of appeasement has borne bitter fruit. They see your desire for peace as the frailty of a doddering king." A dangerous silence followed. Even the ever-boisterous Volstagg seemed to shrink under the weight of Thor's words. Frigga's hand tightened on Izuku's arm. "You are speaking of your king, Thor," Odin said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "And I am speaking as your son. As the prince who was to be king today." Thor jabbed a finger towards the doors. "How can I command the respect of the Nine Realms if I allow our most ancient enemy to defile our home and suffer no consequence? Their king, Lao Fei, must answer for this. We must go to Yotenheim. We must teach them a lesson they will not forget for 1,000 years. We will do no such thing," Odin stated, his tone final. "You are emotional. You do not see the larger picture. I forbid it." "Then I am ashamed to call you father," Thor roared, his fury finally breaking its leash. The All-Father's single eye blazed with a light that seemed to dim the rest of the hall. For a moment, Izuku thought he might strike Thor down, but Odin simply turned away, a gesture of dismissal more wounding than any blow. "You are a vain, greedy, cruel boy, and you are an old man and a fool," Thor shot back. Odin stopped but did not turn. "Yes," he said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that was somehow more terrifying than his anger. I was a fool to think you were ready. He swept from the room, his cape a river of crimson behind him, leaving Thor trembling with a mixture of rage and wounded pride. Thor watched him go, then turned his stormy gaze to his friends. He is wrong, he declared, his voice thick with defiance. A king must act. This insult will not stand. Sif stepped forward, her hand on the hilt of her sword. We are with you, Thor. To stand by and do nothing would be a coward's choice. Fandral added with a flourish, though his usual smirk was absent, replaced by a grim line. Hogan and Volstagg simply nodded, their loyalty absolute. Isuku watched them, his heart sinking into a black abyss of dread. He saw the path they were choosing, a dark, icy road paved with pride and leading to utter disaster. This was Varus's plan, playing out exactly as the treacherous lord had intended. Thor's rage was the key, and it had just turned the lock. He had to stop them. He had to try, one last time, to make them see. He knew where they would go. There was only one path from Asgard to the other realms. He slipped away once more, his movements now fueled by a desperate, sickening urgency. He didn't take the secret corridors this time. He ran, his feet pounding against the golden tiles, his mind screaming. This is my fault. I have to fix it. He reached the Bifrost Observatory before them, his chest heaving, his lungs burning. The magnificent chamber was a marvel of cosmic engineering, a dome of gold and crystal suspended over a chasm of swirling galaxies. At its center stood Heimdall, ever watchful, his golden eyes seeing all. He stood as still as a statue, his great sword planted before him. Prince Isuku. Heimdall's voice resonated, seeming to come from all directions at once. You are troubled. Heimdall, you must not let them pass. Isuku pleaded, rushing forward. Thor means to go to Yotenheim. It's a violation of the treaty. It's what the frost giants want him to do. It is a trap. Heimdall's gaze did not waver from the cosmos. I see your brother and his companions gathering their arms. I see the fire in his heart. But my duty is to the throne. I am forbidden to open the bridge without the Allfather's command. Isuku felt a flicker of hope. Then you will stop him. I will tell him my orders. Heimdall corrected. What he does with that information is his own choice. Just then, the heavy doors to the observatory crashed open. Thor, now in his battle armor, strode in, Mjolnir swinging confidently at his side. Sif and the warriors three followed, their faces set and determined. Thor stopped when he saw Isuku standing before the control pedestal. His lip curled in a sneer. Still trying to meddle in the affairs of warriors, little brother? Thor, please listen to me. Isuku begged, stepping between him and Heimdall. Think for a moment. Don't you see how perfect this is? An attack small enough to be repelled but audacious enough to demand a response. It's a provocation, designed to lure you, the hot-headed new prince, into breaking the truce. Varus, he trailed off, knowing the accusation would sound insane. Varus? Thor scoffed. Now you concoct tales of treason within our own council? Is there no end to your scheming? It is not a scheme. It is the truth. Isuku insisted, his voice rising in desperation. You are being manipulated. Going to Yotenheim now will not prove your strength. It will prove your recklessness. It will give our enemies the very war they seek, and it will make you a king who begins his reign with blood and dishonor. For a fleeting second, Izuku's words seemed to strike a chord. A flicker of doubt crossed Thor's face. He knew Izuku's mind, knew his brother's talent for seeing patterns others missed. But then he looked down and saw Izuku's hands, still faintly shimmering with residual magic, and the memory of his ruined coronation came flooding back. The humiliation, the shame, the betrayal. Your tricks have gone too far, brother! Thor's voice was low and hard, laced with a pain deeper than his anger. You whisper of traps and manipulation, but the only trap I see is the one you laid for me today. You wanted me to fail, to look a fool before Father and all the realms. And now you seek to keep me here, to look a coward as well. He stepped forward, his massive frame towering over Isuku. I do not know what game you are playing, but it ends now. This is no game. Isuku cried, standing his ground. Then get out of my way. Thor shoved him. It was a single, dismissive push, not meant to injure but to remove an obstacle. Isuku stumbled back, his shoulder colliding hard with the cold metal of the bifrost controls. The message was clear: you are irrelevant. Thor turned his full attention to the gatekeeper. Heimdall! Open the bridge! Heimdall's golden eyes finally shifted, focusing on the prince. I cannot! The Allfather has forbidden your passage. Thor's face hardened. Heimdall, we have been friends since we were boys. You are a loyal warrior of Asgard. Can you truly stand by and let this insult to our people go unanswered? My loyalties are to the crown, Heimdall stated, his voice unwavering. And I am the crown! Or I was meant to be! Thor's voice rose to a roar. On my word as your prince, and as your future king, I command you to open the bifrost. Heimdall stood conflicted, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. His oath bound him to Odin. But his heart, the heart of a warrior who had fought alongside Thor for centuries, screamed for retribution. In the end, the sheer force of Thor's will, the blazing certainty of the heir to the throne, won out. With a heavy sigh that seemed to echo with regret, Heimdall turned and plunged his sword into the control pedestal. The observatory roared to life. Rings of gold and crystal spun, and a torrent of rainbow energy blasted forth from the dome, forming a bridge across the cosmos. Isuku watched in abject horror. No! Thor cast one last, contemptuous look at his brother. Stay here and play with your illusions. We have a war to win. He and his companions charged into the swirling vortex of light, their battle cries echoing behind them. The bifrost closed, and the observatory fell silent once more, leaving Isuku alone with Heimdall and the catastrophic consequences of his own failure. Yotenheim was a realm of deathly stillness. Jagged mountains of black ice clawed at a bruised, twilight sky where no sun ever shone. A razor-sharp wind howled through canyons of frozen despair, carrying with it a cold so profound it felt as if it could freeze a man's soul. Thor and his companions landed in a shower of rainbow light, their warm, vibrant presence a stark intrusion in the monochromatic landscape of blues, blacks, and grays. We know you're here! Thor bellowed, his voice swallowed by the vast emptiness. Face us, cowards! For a time, there was no answer but the wailing of the wind. Then, figures began to emerge from the shadows, their blue skin blending almost perfectly with the glacial surroundings. At their head was a tall, gaunt figure with skin the color of a deep crevasse and eyes that burned with an ancient, cold malice. He wore armor of jagged ice and a horned helm. It was Laufey, king of the Jotuns, the sons of Odin. Laufey's voice was like the scraping of ice on stone. To what do we owe this unexpected and unwelcome visit? Do not feign ignorance, Laufey! Thor snarled, taking a threatening step forward, Mjolnir crackling with energy. You sent your beasts into our home. You attacked my coronation. You will answer for this insult. Laufey let out a dry, rasping chuckle. I did no such thing. A few of my reckless children, perhaps, seeking a relic that was stolen from us long ago. You can hardly blame them for wanting back what is theirs. His eyes glided over Thor. But you have your father's arrogance. And his sentimentality. You have come a long way to die, Asgardian. It is you who will die today, for your insolence. Sif shouted. This was the moment. The spark that ignited the powder keg. It was exactly what Isuku had foreseen. Laufey's words were calculated barbs, designed to bypass reason and strike directly at Thor's pride, and they worked perfectly. With a roar of pure, unadulterated fury, Thor hurled Mjolnir. The hammer streaked through the air, a silver thunderbolt that shattered two frost giants into shards of ice before returning to his hand. The battle was joined. For all their arrogance, the Asgardians were magnificent fighters. Thor was a whirlwind of destruction, Mjolnir crashing down with the force of a falling mountain. Sif was a deadly dance of shield and sword, while Fandral, Hogun, and Volstagg fought back to back, a bastion of steel against a tide of ice. But they were on enemy soil, and they were catastrophically outnumbered. For every frost giant they struck down, two more seemed to rise from the ice. The ground itself seemed to be their ally, as jagged spikes of ice erupted from the floor, trying to impale them. Slowly, inevitably, the tide turned. Sif cried out as an ice blade sliced through the armor on her arm. Volstagg was battered to one knee by the club of a massive Jotun berserker. They were being overwhelmed, and then, the ground began to tremble. A fissure opened in the glacier before them, and a creature of nightmare crawled forth. It was a Yotenheim ice beast, a monstrous leviathan of hoarfrost and hate, its roars so cold they frosted the air. Thor stared at the beast, then at his wounded and exhausted friends, then at the endless sea of enemies surrounding them. In that moment, the rage in his eyes was replaced by something else, the cold, dawning horror of a king who had led his people to their doom. His arrogance had shattered, leaving only the terrible certainty that they were all about to die. He raised Mjolnir for one last, desperate stand, but he knew it was hopeless. Suddenly, the sky above them split open. A column of brilliant, rainbow-colored light slammed down into the heart of the battlefield with the force of 1,000 thunderclaps. The Bifrost. When the light faded, Odin stood there, mounted on his 8-legged steed, Sleipnir. He was no longer the aging father from the throne room. He was the god-king of Asgard, the conqueror of realms. His single eye blazed with cosmic fire, and Gungnir hummed with terrifying power in his hand. "Father!" Thor cried out, a wave of shame and relief washing over him. Odin ignored him. He looked at Laufey. "We are finished here," he declared. Laufey sneered. "He is a boy, Odin, trying to prove himself a man. He has failed. And for his failure, your people will pay with their lives." "They will not," Odin said, his voice flat and absolute. He raised Gungnir, and a wave of golden energy erupted from it, blasting back the entire frost giant army. He grabbed Thor by the collar of his armor, hauling him onto Sleipnir's back. Frigga now! Back in Asgard, Frigga, with Isuku at her side, channeled her own powerful magic into the Bifrost controls, overriding the lock. The rainbow bridge flared, pulling the Allfather Thor and his wounded companions from the jaws of death, leaving a furious Laufey standing amidst his thwarted army. The journey back was made in absolute, crushing silence. They materialized back in the observatory, the wounded warriors collapsing onto the floor. Odin dismounted, his face a thundercloud of wrath so potent it seemed to warp the very air around him. He strode towards Thor, who slid from Sleipnir's back and landed on his knees, unable to meet his father's gaze. "You have defied my direct command." Odin's voice was low, trembling with rage. "You have broken a sacred truce. You have risked the lives of your companions, and plunged our realm into the very war I have spent my life trying to prevent. All because your pride was wounded." He pointed a trembling finger at his son. "You are unworthy of this realm. You are unworthy of your title. You are unworthy of the loved ones you have betrayed." Odin reached out and ripped the ceremonial armor from Thor's chest, the metal plates clattering to the floor. "I, Odin Allfather, cast you out!" He seized Thor by the arm and dragged him towards the open Bifrost vortex. Thor looked up, his face a mask of shocked disbelief. "You cannot do this." "I can and I will," Odin thundered. He placed a hand on Thor's head. "I now take from you your power." Isuku watched in horror as the divine energy, the thunder and lightning that was Thor's birthright, was drawn from him. The crackle of ozone vanished. The light in Thor's eyes dimmed. He was suddenly smaller, his powerful muscles seeming to shrink, his godhood stripped away until he was just a man. Odin hurled him into the Bifrost. Thor vanished into the swirling rainbow, his final, desperate cry lost in the cosmic winds. The Allfather then turned to the hammer, Mjolnir, which lay on the floor where Thor had dropped it. He picked it up, his voice echoing with ancient magic as he spoke the enchantment that would seal his son's fate. "Whosoever holds this hammer," he whispered to the Yaru metal, "if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." He tossed the hammer into the vortex after his son. Then he turned to Heimdall. "Send him to a realm where he can learn humility. Send him to Midgard." The Bifrost closed. The silence it left behind was absolute. Thor was gone. Sif and the others, shamed and silent, gathered themselves and limped from the observatory, their heads bowed. Frigga gave Isuku a look of profound sorrow before following them, leaving him alone with his father. Isuku stood trembling, the guilt of physical sickness in his stomach. This was all his fault. His warning, his arrogance, his belief that he could manipulate events from the shadows. He had lit the fuse. "Father!" he choked out, tears streaming down his face. This is my fault. I am the one to blame. I did not mean for this to happen. Odin turned, and the rage was gone from his face. It was replaced by something far, far worse. A cold, deep, and final disappointment. He walked slowly towards Isuku, his footsteps heavy on the crystal floor. He stopped before his younger son, his single eye seeming to pierce right through to Izuku's soul. No, Isuku, Odin said, his voice devoid of warmth. You did not mean for this to happen. You never do. You only mean to nudge, to scheme, to pull the strings and watch the puppets dance. He gestured to the now empty pedestal where the bifrost sword rested. You lit the fuse. He was merely the explosion. His arrogance is a flaw of passion. Yours is a flaw of character. You sought to manipulate events with your shadows and whispers, believing your intellect made you superior to the consequences. Isuku could not speak. Every word was a perfectly aimed dagger, striking him where he was most vulnerable. I have spent a lifetime trying to teach you both what it means to be a king, Odin continued, his voice weary and broken. I see now that I have failed. Thor is a warrior, not a king, and you. He looked down at Isuku, at his slight frame, his scholarly hands, his tear-filled, analytical eyes. You are not a king at all. The All-Father's final words struck Isuku with the force of Mjolnir, shattering what little was left of his spirit. A true king acts. A trickster only schemes. You have proven you are the latter. Odin turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing in the vast, empty chamber. He did not look back. Isuku was left alone, standing in the heart of the broken rainbow, the cosmic bridge that had just carried his brother to exile. The silence of the observatory pressed in on him, the weight of the galaxies swirling below a pale imitation of the guilt that was crushing his soul. He had tried to be a hero, and in doing so, had destroyed his family. He was the god of mischief, and he had never felt less clever in his entire, immortal life. He was utterly, completely, and finally alone. The days that followed the sundering of the royal family were as grey and oppressive as a Midgardian winter. A pall of stunned silence had fallen over Asgard. The boisterous laughter that usually echoed through the palace halls was replaced by the rustle of nervous whispers. The vibrant, living light of the realm seemed muted, as if the cosmos itself were holding its breath. Thor, the son of Asgard, had been extinguished, and the kingdom was left in a chilling twilight. Isuku felt the change more acutely than anyone. Every corridor he walked, every face he passed, was a mirror reflecting his own colossal failure. He saw guards who once offered him respectful nods now averting their gaze, their expressions a mixture of pity and suspicion. He heard servants fall silent as he approached, only to resume their hushed gossip the moment he was gone. He was no longer just the strange, scholarly prince. He was the catalyst, the shadow that had preceded the storm. The architect of the kingdom's sorrow. He had sequestered himself in his study, the one place where the judgment in the air felt less suffocating. He pored over his journals, not to analyze or strategize, but to frantically search for the point where his logic had so catastrophically failed. He retraced every calculation, every probability assessment, every step of his flawed plan. The pages were a testament to his arrogance. He had accounted for enemy movements, magical frequencies, and political fallout, but he had failed to properly weigh the most volatile variable of all, his brother's heart. The guilt was a physical entity, a cold, heavy stone in his gut. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams were haunted by the image of Thor's face in the throne room, twisted with betrayal, and the final, despairing look in his eyes as he was cast into the bifrost. He would wake with a gasp, the phantom echo of his brother's cry ringing in his ears, his own face damp with tears. On the third day of this self-imposed exile, a gentle but firm knock echoed on his chamber door. He ignored it, hoping the visitor would depart. The knock came again, more insistent. "Isuku, my son!" It was his mother's voice, soft but carrying a strength that could not be denied. "You cannot remain in here forever." With a heavy sigh, he rose and unsealed the door. Frigga stood there, her regal bearing unmarred by the grief that shadowed her eyes. She carried a small tray with a steaming cup of herbal tea and a piece of honey bread. "You have not eaten," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She swept past him into the study, her gaze taking in the chaotic mess of scrolls and the dark circles under her son's eyes. I'm not hungry, Isuku mumbled, running a hand through his perpetually messy green-black hair. Grief is not a substitute for sustenance, Frigga replied, setting the tray down on a rare clear spot on his desk. She turned to face him, her expression softening. It was not all your fault, Isuku, wasn't it? He shot back, the words raw with self-loathing. I set the events in motion. I used a forbidden technique to tamper with an ancient artifact. I provoked a reaction I couldn't control. I gave Varus the chaos he needed and Thor the insult he couldn't ignore. My mischief broke our family, Mother. Father was right. Your father is grieving, Frigga said, her voice firm. He lashed out in his pain. But he was wrong to place the entire burden on you. Thor made his own choices. Varus and his conspirators manipulated you both. You acted with the intention of protecting this family, of saving your brother. Your methods may have been unorthodox, but your heart was in the right place. She placed a cool hand on his cheek, forcing him to meet her gaze. The heart of a hero, Isuku. Do not let this failure convince you otherwise. The path of a hero is paved with failures. It is the rising after the fall that defines them. Her words were a balm on his raw soul, but the relief was fleeting. Just as he was about to reply, a deeper tremor ran through the palace, a subtle shift in the magical currents that Isuku had been attuned to his entire life. It was a feeling of profound loss, like a great light being snuffed out. Frigga felt it too. Her face went pale. The Odin force, she whispered. Without another word they ran. They burst into the Allfather's chambers to find him collapsed at the foot of his throne, his breathing shallow, his body rigid. The golden light of the Odin force that normally surrounded him was gone, and his single eye was closed. Gungnir had clattered to the floor beside him. The strain of stripping Thor of his power, casting the enchantments on Mjolnir, and banishing his firstborn, all while suppressing his own immense grief, had been too much. The Allfather had fallen into the Odin sleep, the deep, restorative slumber a king of Asgard must endure to replenish his cosmic power. It could last for days, for seasons, or, if the damage was great enough, for centuries. As the royal physicians rushed in, a new, colder dread settled over Isuku. With Thor banished and Odin incapacitated, the line of succession was terrifyingly clear. Asgard was without a king, and he, Isuku, the god of mischief, the disgraced schemer, was now the sole heir in attendance. He was the regent. The throne was his. The burden of the crown was a physical thing. The Hlidskjaf, the high throne of Asgard, was not designed for comfort. It was carved from the heartwood of a celestial tree, its surface inlaid with Yaryu runes that hummed with a power that vibrated through Izuku's bones. Sitting upon it felt like being judged by history itself. The armrests were too wide for his slender frame. His feet barely touched the floor, and the sheer weight of the gazes from the assembled court felt like a physical pressure on his shoulders. He had been thrust into this position less than an hour after Odin's collapse. The council, led by a gravely concerned-looking Lord Varus, had convened an emergency session. They had spoken of stability, of the need to show the 9 realms that Asgard was not weakened. The law was clear. The throne could not be empty. Prince Isuku, Varus had said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. We know this is a difficult time for you, for all of us. But Asgard needs a leader. Until the Allfather awakens, you must guide us. You must sit the throne. Isuku had wanted to scream, to run, to tell them they had chosen the worst possible person for the role. He, who had just proven himself utterly incapable of leadership, was now meant to command a kingdom. It was a cosmic joke of the cruelest kind. But he saw the fear in the eyes of the lesser council members, the uncertainty among the guards. To refuse would be to admit weakness, to plunge the realm into chaos. For the sake of his mother, for the sake of the people, he had to accept. So now he sat there, clad in hastily prepared regent's robes of dark green and gold that felt like a costume, trying to project an aura of authority he did not feel. The regular business of the court continued, a surreal parade of disputes and petitions. A delegation of light elves from Alfheim were arguing with a contingent of dwarves from Nidavellir over mining rights in a shared asteroid belt. A grain merchant from the lower city was accusing a farmer of using inferior runes of preservation. Isuku listened, his mind, out of sheer habit, beginning to analyze. He was drowning in guilt and self-doubt, but the intricate machinery of problem-solving was the one thing he could cling to. The dwarves, he noted, were arguing from a position of historical precedent, while the elves were using projections of future resource depletion. The grain merchants' ledgers showed a statistical anomaly in spoilage rates that correlated perfectly with the dates the farmer made his deliveries. The court expected him to make grand, sweeping judgments. They expected a roar or a whisper of command. Instead, they got muttering. The elven charters of the Third Era grant subsurface rights, but the dwarven accords of the Fourth specify mineralogical extraction. The conflict isn't legal, it's terminological. If we redefine mineral versus crystal based on lattice structure, yes, that could work. This spoilage is fungal. Inferior preservation runes wouldn't cause this specific type of decay, but exposure to Vanaheim bog spores would. The farmer's trade route passes through the Whispering Fin. He isn't malicious, just careless. He would fall into these analytical trances, his eyes unfocused, his fingers drumming on the armrest of the throne. Then he would blink, straighten up, and deliver his verdict. Lord Varys, he'd say, his voice surprisingly clear and steady. Draft a new trade codicil for the Council's review, defining mineral and crystal rights by atomic composition, not by luminosity or location. It will resolve 80% of current Elven-Dwarven disputes. Then he would turn to the commoners. Merchant, your grain is not cursed, it is contaminated. The fault lies with the farmer's transport methods, not his integrity. Farmer, you will compensate the merchant for his losses and reroute your wagons around the fen. Case dismissed. The court was baffled. His solutions were elegant, logical, and astonishingly effective. He ruled not with the thunder of Thor or the wisdom of Odin, but with the quiet, unnerving precision of a master scholar. He solved problems no one else had even properly identified. The realm, to his analytical mind, was just a grander, more complex version of the broken training golem. He was simply finding the faulty rune, the overloaded power source, and fixing it without smashing the whole machine. But this was a mask. A coping mechanism. The moment the court was dismissed and he was alone in the cavernous throne room, the mask would crumble. The guilt would return, a suffocating wave. He wasn't a king. He was a fraud, a boy playing dress-up on his father's chair. And a darker thought gnawed at him. Varys, the treacherous lord, was a constant presence at his side, his face a perfect picture of a loyal advisor. He offered counsel, managed the flow of petitioners, and praised Izuku's unique wisdom with a sincerity that made Izuku's skin crawl. Varys had gotten everything he wanted. Thor was gone. A war with Yotenheim was now all but inevitable. And a weak, pliable prince, the very one Varys had underestimated, was on the throne. The conspirator was now the regent's most trusted advisor. Izuku knew he was being watched. He knew that any move against Varys would be seen as the paranoid fantasy of a grieving, unstable boy. He couldn't fight him openly. He had no allies, no proof, so he did what he always did. He began an investigation. He couldn't use the authority of the throne. That would alert Varys. He had to use the skills of the god of mischief. Under the guise of reviewing ancient legal precedents in the royal archives, he spent his nights poring over security logs and patrol rosters from the day of the coronation. Using his regent's seal, he accessed restricted surveillance recordings, not as a king demanding answers, but as a scholar cross-referencing architectural blueprints for a historical treatise. And in the darkest hours of the night, he used his own magic. He had never been a proficient shapeshifter. It required a degree of performative confidence he simply didn't possess. But he could manage small changes. He could alter the color of his hair, the shape of his nose, the timbre of his voice. He became a palace servant, a low-ranking guardsman, an elderly scholar. He walked the halls he now ruled, invisible in plain sight, and he listened. He gathered whispers, rumors, and fragments of conversation. A guard complaining about being mysteriously reassigned from his post near the vaults minutes before the attack. A servant who saw Lord Varys speaking in hushed tones with a man she didn't recognize, a man who smelled faintly of cold and frost. He meticulously recorded every scrap of information in a new journal, this one bound in plain, unmarked leather. He filled its pages with timelines, diagrams of guard movements, and transcripts of overheard conversations. It was his hero analysis for the future, but the subject was not a hero. It was a traitor. The evidence was circumstantial, a web of coincidences and whispers. It was not enough to act. He needed something more. He needed an ally. Someone whose loyalty was beyond question. Someone who saw everything. The Bifrost Observatory was cold and silent, the great machine dormant. Heimdall stood at his post, an immovable, golden-armored statue staring out at the cosmos. He had not moved since the day Thor was banished. Isuku approached him hesitantly. Of all the people in Asgard, Heimdall had the most reason to despise him. It was Izuku's desperate plea that had planted the first seed of doubt, followed by Thor's forceful command that had led Heimdall to betray his oath to Odin. Lord Heimdall, Isuku said, his voice small in the vast, silent dome. Heimdall did not turn, but his voice echoed around them. My prince. Or should I say, my king regent? There was no warmth in the title. Heimdall, I know that what happened here was my fault as much as it was Thor's. Izuku began, forcing the words out. I put you in an impossible position. I am sorry. For the first time, Heimdall turned his head, his luminous golden eyes fixing on Isuku. His gaze was intense, seeming to strip away all pretense and peer directly into Izuku's soul. I see your guilt, son of Odin. It is a heavy burden, it is, Isuku admitted, his shoulders slumping. But there is something heavier. Treason. I believe the attack on the Coronation was an inside job. I believe Lord Varus orchestrated it to provoke Thor and incite a war with Yotenheim. Heimdall was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the star-dusted abyss. Your words are a grave accusation against a respected member of Odin's court. I have no proof that would hold up in the throne room, Isuku confessed. Only whispers. Fragments. A pattern that only I can see. I am the god of mischief. My word is inherently untrustworthy. That is why I have come to you. You see all. Tell me, Lord Heimdall. What did you see on that day? Heimdall's gaze remained fixed on the cosmos. I saw what I was meant to see. I saw 3 Jotuns enter the throne room. I did not see them enter Asgard. Izuku's heart leaped. What do you mean? The Bifrost was not opened. The secret passages known to the Allfather remained sealed. And yet they appeared within the palace walls. Heimdall explained, his voice a low rumble. There are very few ways for such a thing to occur. It would require a deep knowledge of our defenses, and a brief, targeted suspension of my own sight. A blind spot. Such a thing can only be created by powerful seed magic, woven from within the palace itself. Izuku's mind raced. Varus wasn't a magic user, but he had co-conspirators. He had help. This was the missing piece of the puzzle. Heimdall, I need your help, Isuku said, his voice gaining a new strength, a new resolve. His guilt was still there, a cold stone in his heart, but now it was joined by a burning, righteous anger. He would not let his brother's exile, his father's collapse, be in vain. He would not let Varus succeed. I am regent. I command the armies and the treasury. But I cannot command trust. You are the eyes of Asgard. Your loyalty is absolute. Help me find the proof I need. Heimdall turned fully to face him, his golden eyes searching Izuku's. He saw the grief, the guilt, the fear. But underneath it all, he saw something else. He saw the same fierce, unwavering determination that he had seen in Odin in his youth. He saw a prince who, despite being saddled with the title of a trickster, possessed the unyielding heart of a protector. The Allfather placed his trust in me to watch over this realm, Heimdall said slowly. My duty is to Asgard. If there is a rot within our court, it is my duty to help expose it. He paused, a silent contract passing between the gatekeeper and the Shadow Prince. What would you have me do? A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled Izuku's knees washed over him. He had an ally. He wasn't alone anymore. Can you see Thor? Isuku asked, the question a raw, hopeful whisper. On Midgard? Is he all right? Heimdall closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his golden gaze was focused on a distant point in the cosmos. I see him. He is in a place of sand and fire, a realm they call New Mexico. He is humbled. He is confused. He is learning what it is to be mortal. But he is alive. And he is not alone. He has found companions. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, but for the first time since the coronation, they were tears of relief, not despair. Thor was alive. Thor was safe. This knowledge settled the storm in his soul, hardening his resolve into unbreakable steel. He had a kingdom to protect. A traitor to expose. A brother's honor to restore. He looked at Heimdall, the quiet confidence of a strategist finally overriding the fear of a boy. "Keep watching him, Heimdall," Izuku said, his voice steady. "Watch over my brother. And as for me, show me everything Lord Varus does when he believes no one is looking." Heimdall nodded, a single, solemn gesture of allegiance. Izuku turned and walked from the observatory, his posture straighter, his step more certain. He still wore the ill-fitting robes of a regent, and he still sat upon a throne that felt far too large. But he was no longer just the grieving son or the accidental king. He was a prince with a purpose. He had his journals, he had his wits, and he had the eyes of Asgard on his side. Lord Varus thought he was playing a game with a pawn. He was about to find out he was playing chess with a grandmaster. And the god of mischief was finally ready to make his move. The partnership between Izuku and Heimdall was a silent, clandestine thing, a conspiracy of two forged in the cold twilight of the Bifrost Observatory. It operated not through spoken words or secret meetings, but through shared sight and quiet understanding. During the long, arduous days in the throne room, Isuku would occasionally glance towards the great crystalline windows that faced the Bifrost Bridge, and he would feel it, a subtle pressure in his mind, a fleeting image, a whisper of cosmic observation. Heimdall was watching. With the gatekeeper as his eyes, the fragmented puzzle of Lord Varus's treason began to assemble itself with alarming speed. Heimdall's sight pierced stone and shadow, transcending the simple physical limitations that had hampered Izuku's own investigation. A brief vision, delivered to Izuku's mind's eye while he was mediating a tedious trade dispute, Varus in his private chambers, tracing a shimmering, unfamiliar rune on a piece of dark parchment. The rune pulsed with a cold, blue light, a magic that was distinctly Jotun in origin. A snippet of sound, a whisper carried on the cosmic winds, Varus speaking to his reflection in a polished shield, his voice a low murmur. Laufey grows impatient. The boy king is more resourceful than anticipated. A direct approach may be necessary. A fleeting glimpse of a clandestine meeting in the forgotten catacombs beneath the palace. Varus handing a pouch of something heavy to a cloaked figure. Izuku couldn't see the figure's face, but he saw the faint shimmer of the same seed magic Heimdall had described, the magic used to create the blind spot. The traitor had a sorcerer in his employ. Isuku meticulously documented each piece of information in his plain leather journal, his quill scratching furiously late into the night. His study, once a sanctuary of theoretical knowledge, had become a war room. He cross-referenced Heimdall's visions with palace architectural plans, security patrol logs, and his own overheard whispers. A web of conspiracy began to take shape on the parchment, a complex diagram of names, dates, and secret pathways, all centered around one venomous spider, Lord Varus. He discovered the names of two other council members who were part of the plot, Lord Gunnar and Lady Alara, both hardline traditionalists who had long advocated for a more aggressive stance against the Outer Realms. He identified the sorcerer as a disgraced Vanir mage named Malakar, known for his expertise in illusion and dimensional concealment. Malakar was the one who had created Heimdall's blind spot and teleported the frost giants directly into the throne room. The plan was becoming horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just about provoking Thor. That had merely been the opening gambit. Varus's true goal was far more ambitious and far more monstrous. He intended to seize control of Asgard itself. The key was the Odin sleep. Varus had likely anticipated that the strain of the day's events would weaken the Allfather. With Odin incapacitated, Thor banished, and a seemingly weak, ineffectual Isuku on the throne, the path to power was clear. Varus intended to assassinate Odin in his sleep. Izuku's hand trembled as he wrote the words. The sheer, cold-blooded audacity of it was breathtaking. Varus would use Malakar's magic to bypass the guards around the Allfather's chambers. He would murder the sleeping king with a Jotun blade, a weapon whose magical signature was unmistakable. He would then, discover the body, plant evidence implicating Lao Fei, and use the ensuing outrage to launch his long-desired war against Yotenheim. In the chaos, with the people of Asgard screaming for vengeance, who better to lead them than the strong, decisive Lord Varus? He would be hailed as the savior, the one man who had the strength to lead them in their darkest hour. He would consolidate his power, likely installing himself as Lord Protector or even King, all under the guise of patriotic duty. Isuku stared at the completed diagram in his journal. The entire conspiracy was laid bare before him, a beautiful, terrible tapestry of treason. He had the what, the who, the how, and the why. He had everything he needed, except proof. His evidence was a collection of magically procured visions and his own deductions. It was a compelling narrative, but it was not tangible. If he presented this to the court, Varus would simply deny it. He would paint Isuku as a paranoid, power-mad regent, driven mad by grief, concocting wild fantasies to eliminate his political rivals. And the court, already wary of the god of mischief, would believe him. He could almost hear Varus's smooth, reasonable voice turning the council against him. Our young regent is overwrought. His imagination has gotten the better of him, a sad consequence of the recent tragedies. He slumped back in his chair, the weight of the discovery crushing him. He was trapped in a paradox. He held the truth, but his reputation rendered it unbelievable. He was the boy who cried wolf, and the wolf was already inside the house, wearing the fleece of a loyal sheep. A direct confrontation was doomed. An accusation without irrefutable proof was suicide. He couldn't fight Varus on the political battlefield of the court. Varus owned that territory. He couldn't fight him on the physical battlefield. Varus was a seasoned warrior, and Isuku was not. He stared at his journal, at the title he had subconsciously written on the first page months ago, Strategic Mischief for the Nine Realms. The words seemed to mock him, then to challenge him. He couldn't use the tools of a king or a warrior. So he would have to use his own. He wouldn't confront Varus with the truth. He would make Varus confront it himself. He wouldn't present evidence to the court. He would make Varus become the evidence. He couldn't beat the traitor at his own game of political maneuvering. So he would have to create a new game entirely, one where the rules were his and his alone. A new plan began to form in his mind, not a desperate gamble like the one at the Coronation, but a cold, calculated masterpiece of psychological warfare. It was a plan built on Varus's own arrogance, his own ambition, and his utter underestimation of the quiet, muttering boy on the throne. It was a plan of grand theater, of exquisite deception. It was, in its purest form, a work of mischief. He began to mutter, the familiar cadence a comforting rhythm in the silent study. The objective is not to convince the court, but to force a public confession. A confession under duress is invalid, therefore, the subject must condemn himself willingly, requires a controlled environment where the subject believes he is in a position of power, a grand stage. The perception of reality must be manipulated, but the core events presented must be undeniably true, a truth told through a lie. His quill began to fly across a fresh page, no longer documenting the past, but scripting the future. He sketched out the layout of the throne room, marking positions for guards, council members, and key players. He began weaving complex runic sequences for a spell of unprecedented scale and complexity. A mass projection illusion, not just visual, but auditory and sensory, capable of affecting hundreds of people simultaneously. It would be the most difficult piece of magic he had ever attempted, a performance that would require every ounce of his power and concentration. He was no longer just a regent or an investigator. He had become a writer, a director, and the lead actor in a play of his own devising, with the fate of Asgard as his opening night. The throne room would be his stage, the court his audience, and Lord Varus his unwilling star. In the midst of his frantic planning, a profound sense of loneliness washed over him. This was a burden he had to carry alone. He couldn't tell his mother. It would put her in danger. He couldn't confide in Sif or the Warriors 3. Their loyalty was to Thor, and their solution would be to charge in with swords drawn, which would play right into Varus's hands. He was an island, surrounded by a sea of potential enemies and misguided friends. His thoughts drifted, as they often did, to his brother. He longed for Thor's simple, unwavering certainty. Thor would never have found himself in this tangled web of intrigue. He would have smashed it to pieces long ago. Isuku missed his booming laugh, his bone-crushing hugs, even his well-meaning but frustratingly obtuse view of the world. He felt a familiar pressure in his mind, Heimdall. He closed his eyes, focusing on the connection. Heimdall, he thought, the word a silent plea. Show me my brother. The oppressive walls of his study melted away, replaced by a vision so clear and bright it made him ache. He saw a vast, red desert under a brilliant blue sky. The sun was a harsh, white orb, a stark contrast to Asgard's gentle glow. He saw a small, dusty mortal settlement, a collection of low, square buildings. And he saw Thor. He was different. He wore strange, common clothes, what the mortals called jeans and a flannel shirt. His golden hair was shorter, messier. The divine light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a weary but determined human spark. He was no longer a prince or a god. He was just a man. A very large, very confused man. He was with a group of mortals. A woman with bright, intelligent eyes who seemed to be explaining something on a complex chart, Jane Foster. A younger, more cynical woman with a deadpan expression, Darcy Lewis. And an older, wiser man who watched Thor with a paternal curiosity, Eric Selvig. They were his companions, his new pack. The vision sharpened, focusing on a pivotal moment. A monstrous shape was descending from the sky. Isuku recognized it with a jolt of ice-cold dread, the destroyer, the guardian of the vault. Varys must have somehow convinced the acting council to send it, likely under the guise of testing Thor's worthiness or defending Asgard's honor. In reality, it was an assassination attempt, a way to clean up the loose end of the exiled prince. The destroyer landed, its metallic form shimmering with heat, its faceplate glowing with destructive energy. The mortals screamed, scrambling for cover. But Thor did not run. He walked towards the automaton, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. There was no arrogance in his stride, no bravado. Only a quiet, profound sense of duty. He had brought this destruction upon these people, and he would be the one to face it. Brother, Thor said, his voice raw, speaking to Isuku as if he were there. Whatever I have done to wrong you, I am sorry for it. But these people are innocent. Take my life, and spare them. He stood his ground as the destroyer's armored hand swatted him aside like an insect. The blow was brutal, horrific. Isuku cried out in his study, a strangled sob escaping his lips as he watched his brother's mortal form crumple to the ground, broken and lifeless. The light in his brother's eyes finally, truly, went out. Jane Foster screamed, a sound of pure, heart-shattering anguish. In that moment, Izuku's world went silent. The grief was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He had failed. Thor was dead. Varys had won. But then, something miraculous happened. High in the Midgardian sky, a silver speck appeared, hurtling towards the desert floor. Mjolnir. It had heard its master's final, selfless act. It had judged him worthy. The hammer slammed into the sand beside Thor's lifeless hand. His fingers twitched, then closed around the leather-wrapped hilt. A deafening crack of thunder shook the desert. A bolt of pure, divine lightning lanced down from the heavens, striking the hammer. The power of the god of thunder surged back into Thor's body. His wounds vanished. His eyes snapped open, blazing with the light of 1,000 storms. The armor of an Asgardian prince materialized over his mortal clothes, his red cape billowing in the sudden wind. He was reborn. Not as the arrogant prince who had been banished, but as something more. Something greater. A true hero. Thor rose to his feet, Mjolnir humming in his hand, and with a single, devastating blow, he tore the destroyer apart. The vision faded, leaving Isuku on his knees in his study, tears streaming down his face. They were not tears of grief, but of overwhelming relief, of profound, soul-shaking pride. His brother had found his way back. He had proven himself worthy, not through battle or conquest, but through sacrifice. He had learned the lesson that Odin had sent him to learn. The sight galvanized Isuku. His own path was now crystal clear. Thor had won his battle. Now Isuku had to win his. He had to ensure that his brother, the true and worthy king, had a home to return to. He stood up, wiping the tears from his face with the back of his sleeve. The fear and doubt that had plagued him were burned away, replaced by an iron certainty. He picked up his quill, his hand no longer trembling. The final pieces of his plan slotted into place, his mind a whirlwind of focused, creative energy. His grand illusion would not just be an accusation. It would be a story. The story of Varys's treason. He wouldn't just show the court what the traitor had done. He would make them feel the betrayal, the cynical manipulation, the cold ambition. He would use his magic not as a weapon, but as a lens, focusing the light of truth so brightly that no one could dare look away. He knew the risks. The spell would drain him completely. It would leave him vulnerable, exposed. The strain could even be fatal. But it didn't matter. Thor had been willing to die for a handful of mortals he had just met. Isuku could do no less for his brother, for his kingdom. He spent the next day making his preparations. He sent out official summons for a grand court assembly, announcing that he, as regent, had a major proclamation to make regarding the ongoing crisis with Yotenheim. The message was intentionally vague, designed to pique curiosity and ensure attendance. He knew Varys would be there, confident and smug, believing he was about to witness his puppet prince formally declare the war he had engineered. He visited his mother, telling her he had found a way to bring stability back to the realm. He couldn't share the details, but he hugged her tightly, pouring all of his love and gratitude into the embrace. She looked at him, a flicker of worried understanding in her eyes, and simply said, "Be true to yourself, my son. Your heart is your greatest strength." Finally, he went to Odin's chambers. He stood beside the great, canopied bed where his father slept, the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest the only movement in the silent room. The Odin force was a faint, dormant whisper around the sleeping king. "Father," Isuku said, his voice low. "I know you see my methods as a weakness. You see shadows and whispers where you wish there was thunder and steel, but I promise you, I will use these shadows to protect your light. I will use my mischief to defend your honor. I hope one day you will understand." He gently placed his hand over his father's. For a fleeting moment, he thought he felt a faint, answering pressure. Or perhaps it was just wishful thinking. He walked from the room, leaving his childhood insecurities behind him. He was no longer the boy desperate for his father's approval, no longer the shadow cowering from his brother's light. He was Isuku of Asgard. And he was going to save his family, not with a hammer, but with a plan.